On the morning of April 27th, 1986, every resident of an entire Soviet city was told they had 2 hours to pack one bag and get on a bus. They were told it was temporary. They would be back in 3 days. They left their apartments unlocked. They left food on their tables. They left books open on their desks. They left toys on the floor and clothes in the closets. Nobody ever came back. The city of Pripyat has been empty for 40 years, and everything they left behind is still there. Pripyat was built in 1970 for one purpose: to house the workers and families of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, located just 2 miles away. By 1986, the city had grown to nearly 49,000 people. The average age of a resident was just 26. It was one of the youngest cities in the entire Soviet Union. And for a Soviet city in the 1980s, Pripyat was considered a great place to live. The apartments were modern by Soviet standards. Concrete panel buildings ranging from 5 to 16 stories, arranged in neat rows with courtyards and playgrounds in between. The city had 15 kindergartens, 5 schools, a hospital, a fire station, a cinema, a cultural center, 2 sports stadiums, a swimming pool, and a public library. There were grocery stores stocked better than most Soviet cities because the government wanted to attract and retain nuclear plant workers. There was a main square, called Lenin Square, with a large hotel, a department store, and a restaurant. Flower beds lined the sidewalks. Trees had been planted along every major road. In spring, the city was covered in blossoming trees, and the air smelled like lilac. Families gathered on balconies in the evenings. Kids rode bikes through the courtyards after school. Teenagers met at the cinema on weekends. And there was one thing in Pripyat that every resident was looking forward to in the spring of 1986. A brand new amusement park had just been built in the center of the city. It had a Ferris wheel, bumper cars, swing boats, and a shooting gallery. The grand opening was scheduled for May 1st, May Day, the biggest holiday in the Soviet calendar. Posters were already up around the city advertising the opening. The Ferris wheel stood tall and bright yellow against the skyline, waiting for its first riders. It would never carry a single one. At 1:23 in the morning on April 26, 1986, the crew of Reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl plant was conducting a safety test. The test was meant to determine how long the turbines would spin and supply power following a loss of electrical power. It had been postponed from the day shift to the night shift, meaning a less experienced crew was now running it. During the test, a sudden and uncontrolled power surge occurred inside the reactor. In less than a minute, the reactor's power output spiked to roughly 100 times its normal level. The fuel rods inside the core shattered. A steam explosion blew the 1,000-ton concrete lid off the top of the reactor building. A second explosion followed almost immediately, sending burning chunks of nuclear fuel and graphite into the night sky. 2 plant workers were lost in the initial explosions. Fires broke out on the roof of the reactor building and on the surrounding structures. The firefighters of Pripyat were called immediately. They arrived within minutes, climbing onto the rooftops and fighting the fires without any real understanding of what they were being exposed to. Many of them were young men in their 20s. Most of them would not survive the following weeks. Meanwhile, just 2 miles away, the people of Pripyat slept. Some residents who were awake later recalled seeing a strange blue-white glow in the sky above the power plant. A few walked out onto their balconies to watch. Some even took their children to a railway bridge overlooking the plant to get a better view of the glow. They stood there in the open air, watching the light, not knowing what it was. When the sun rose on April 26th, the people of Pripyat woke up to what seemed like a normal Saturday morning. Children went out to play. People walked to the market. A wedding was scheduled for later that day. The weather was warm and sunny, a perfect spring day. But something was off. There were military vehicles on some of the roads. A few people noticed a metallic taste in the air. Some reported headaches and a strange, tingling sensation on their skin, especially anyone who had been outdoors for a while. A few residents who had watched the glow from the bridge the night before were already feeling seriously unwell. The Soviet government said nothing. No public announcement was made. No evacuation was ordered. Officials in Moscow were still trying to understand the scale of what had happened. Local authorities in Pripyat were told to keep things calm. Schools remained open. Markets continued operating. The wedding went ahead. For 36 hours, the people of Pripyat lived their lives in a city that was already becoming uninhabitable. The invisible contamination was settling on every surface, on the playground equipment where children were playing, on the food, drying on balconies, on the laundry hanging between apartment buildings, on the grass where families were picnicking in the spring sunshine. At 2 p.m. on April 27th, more than 36 hours after the initial event, the evacuation order finally came. A calm voice on the city's public address system told residents that they were being temporarily relocated. They were instructed to bring documents, essential belongings, and enough food for 3 days. They were told they would return shortly. Within hours, over 1,200 buses arrived in Pripyat. The entire population, all 49,000 people, was loaded onto buses and driven out of the city. The process took approximately 3.5 hours. People locked their apartments. Some left notes for neighbors. Children brought their favorite toys. Pets were left behind. Residents were told they couldn't bring animals. As the last buses pulled out of the city, Pripyat fell silent. Apartments stood with doors closed, but unlocked. Tables were set for meals that would never be eaten. Televisions were left on. Calendars showed April 1986. The amusement park sat perfectly still, its Ferris wheel motionless against the sky. The bumper cars sat in their enclosure, empty. The swings hung at rest. Nobody ever came back. The 3-day temporary evacuation became permanent. The residents of Pripyat were scattered across Ukraine and resettled in other cities. Most of them never saw their homes again. In the weeks and months that followed, the Soviet military established an exclusion zone around the power plant, a circle roughly 19 miles in radius. Everything inside that zone was abandoned. Villages, farms, forests, all left to nature. Pripyat itself became a ghost city. The apartments stood exactly as they had been left. Kitchen tables still had plates and cups on them. Children's bedrooms still had toys on the floor. In one kindergarten, small shoes were still lined up near the door where children had left them. School books lay open on desks. In the hospital, medical records remained in filing cabinets. In the swimming pool, the starting blocks still stood at the edge of the lanes. In the gymnasium, a basketball sat on the court where someone had left it. The only new arrivals were the trees. Nature began reclaiming Pripyat almost immediately. Grass pushed through cracks in the concrete. Saplings grew in courtyards. Within a decade, the city's carefully planted flower beds had been replaced by wild growth. Within 2 decades, the streets were barely visible under the vegetation. Within 3 decades, full-grown trees were pushing through the walls and floors of apartment buildings. Animals returned too. Without human presence, the exclusion zone became an accidental wildlife sanctuary. Wild horses, wolves, foxes, deer, and even bison now roam the empty streets of Pripyat. Eagles nest on the rooftops of abandoned apartment buildings. Fish swim in the cooling ponds of the plant. The forest has swallowed the roads, the playgrounds, and the courtyards. Nature didn't mourn the city. It just moved in. Today, Pripyat is one of the most haunting places on Earth. Since 2011, limited tourism has been allowed inside the exclusion zone. Visitors can walk the streets of the abandoned city, escorted by guides carrying radiation monitors. The experience is unlike anything else. You are walking through a city that is frozen in 1986. The Soviet-era posters are still on the walls, though faded and peeling. The apartment buildings still stand in their rows, though their windows are broken and their interiors are crumbling. The swimming pool, which was actually kept open for plant workers until 1998, is now drained and decaying, its blue tiles cracked and mossy. And then there is the amusement park. The Ferris wheel, bright yellow in 1986, now rusted to a deep orange-brown, still stands. It is one of the most photographed landmarks in the exclusion zone, and perhaps the most powerful symbol of what was lost. A ride built for joy, standing unused for 40 years, slowly being consumed by rust and time. The bumper cars sit exactly where they were left, now covered in moss and fallen leaves. The swing boats hang motionless from rusted chains. The power plant itself is visible from many parts of the city. Reactor 4, the source of the disaster, was enclosed in a concrete sarcophagus shortly after the event, and in 2016, a massive new containment structure, the largest movable structure ever built, was slid into place over the old one. It is designed to last 100 years. What happens after that remains an open question. On the morning of April 26, 1986, a mother in Pripyat made breakfast in her kitchen. A boy rode his bicycle through a courtyard. A girl looked out her window at the new Ferris wheel and counted the days until May 1st. By the next afternoon, they were all gone. Not because the city was destroyed, but because it was poisoned. Pripyat is still standing. The apartments are still there. The furniture is still inside. The toys are still on the floor. The calendar on the wall still shows April 1986. The only thing missing is the people, and they're never coming back.